Dr. Hiba Salem. Welcome to the Wellness Butter Show.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Today, we're going to be talking about supporting caregivers because often caregivers don't really take care of themselves
Right.
while they're taking care of patients and family members. But it's such an important role, and it's so important for them to also look after themselves. Whether it's a diagnosis, a chronic illness, or a mental health condition, everyone's focus naturally turns towards the patient. But
Right.
why do caregivers so often become what you call the hidden patient?
Right. That's a great question. Primarily, it's because the attention naturally shifts or flows towards whoever is the sickest. And caregivers often reinforce this themselves. They tend to minimize their own needs. They tend to do so essentially to protect their energy for someone else who they identify as the care receiver. And then over time, exhaustion, this grief, these health problems start to go unnoticed and untreated, even though essentially caregivers and the process of caregiving raises the risk of depression, anxiety, physical illness, burnout. But all of these things tend to go unnoticed and untreated. They dismiss them, they tend to delay the care that they need. Essentially, as well, the system, whether it's medical or social, is built around the patient or the care receiver. So caregivers slip into the background of their own lives and tend to go unnoticed. And as you mentioned, they become the hidden patient.
What is the emotional journey that caregivers typically go through that people don't see on the outside?
Right. So essentially, at the beginning of this journey, there's that early phase where it's adrenaline, where there's purpose, right? At the beginning, when you first go into that caregiver role, you find purpose, you find adrenaline, there's drive, there's a push. And basically, this appears as showing up, problem solving, feeling needed, etc. Underneath, there are other emotions that start to show up. Grief is one of them, right? Grief starts very early too. Basically, you're grieving what was, whether it's expectations, whether it's an old reality, grieving a relationship that was a more balanced relationship that used to exist, maybe grieving your own expectations, maybe grieving a future that has been changed or altered, sometimes grieving a person who's still alive but who's changed in different ways, maybe even your own choices, your own ability to decision make without having to factor in your caregiving role. And a lot of emotions tend to coexist within this journey. There's love and resentment tend to coexist a lot of the time. And this also creates a lot of shame. How am I resenting someone who I love so much, right? How am I feeling such negative feelings? How am I even feeling burnout when I'm taking care of someone who needs me, who loves me, who is struggling themselves, right? So this brings on some shame, some guilt, and this leads the person to actually take care less of themselves. It leads the caregiver to downplay their own needs even further because they're trying to address this shame and this guilt that they're feeling, right? A lot of other emotions that may come up at this point are anticipatory grief as well, chronic worry, identity loss. Who am I outside of this role, right? Because this role doesn't just stay within that scope of the patient and the caregiver relationship. It's present to other roles in your life. You're sometimes having to say no to things that you want to say yes to. You're having to forego certain outings, certain events, certain life choices, certain decisions because of this role. And so sometimes there becomes this identity loss of who am I outside this role? And this slowly builds quietly underneath the competence that people typically see on the surface, that drive, that motivation, that purpose that usually does show up on the surface. There's a lot going on underneath that.
I didn't realize that grief was one of the starting points, basically, of this journey for caregivers. I think a lot of times people may not recognize it as grief. That's why, of course, yes, your life is changing.
Yeah.
You now identify with something new. Your relationship has changed. Yeah, I didn't realize it was grief,
Yeah.
which makes a lot of sense now. Yeah.
And I think we also like downplay when we think about grief. A lot of the times we associate grief to actual loss. You
Yeah.
have lost the person, even a material thing, but there has to be an actual loss that's tangible. You have to be able to identify it, to see it, for you to be able to say, oh, this is grief. But sometimes we tend to overlook the idea that grief can exist even if we haven't lost the person, right? We can lose the idea, we can lose the relationship, we can lose comfort, we can lose safety, we can lose a lot of things, right? Even security can be lost, and that also comes into play. Loss of, when we talk about safety and security as well, and the loss of safety and security, it's sometimes it's the safety that comes with knowing what tomorrow brings, right? When your world is turned upside down, it's like, I don't know where to start anymore. Everything I had planned, everything that was structured, everything that was organized is now up in the air. And so there's this also sense of confusion and loss, right? And so, of course, grief comes with that. But it's not mentioned. It's very rarely identified as loss and as grief, because we expect that that comes with losing an actual person and not with losing stability, safety, security, control, etc., etc.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so interesting.
Yeah.
And caregiver burnout then is a thing, right? I'm sure as people take on this role and they identify with it, people don't know how long they're in the role. Sometimes it could be forever.
Yeah.
So what are the sort of early warning signs to tell?
So grief that doesn't arrive suddenly. It's like a slow accumulation of things, right? Good to sort of notice the slow accumulation, because if we've gotten to the burnout, it's sometimes like to be able to come back from it is exhausting as well in and of itself. But it's important for us to try to see, as you said, the early signs, because it's most of the time it's a slow accumulation. It starts with that, for example, we're not sleeping as much, whether it's because of the physical demands of taking care of someone who needs us, who may be waking up at different times of the night, caregiver, like, or it's the mental demands, the cognitive demands, the emotional demands, trying to anticipate things, worrying, strategizing, trying to plan for a new reality. So sleep debt starts to build up, skipped meals, sometimes isolation, because as we said, you're shifting from a life where you're focused on yourself while incorporating others into it. And now you're shifting your focus completely onto someone else, and you are part of the periphery rather than the center. So sometimes isolation comes with that. As we mentioned, unprocessed grief. So basically, it is noticing these accumulations. And when we talk about these accumulations, it's also important to see anything that changes from the norm, right? Anytime you're noticing a shift from the norm, don't dismiss it as, oh, it's fine, it's fine, it's fine. If you're noticing yourself, for example, getting triggered by one small thing like a spilled glass, a scheduling conflict, a missed call, a missed appointment, etc., etc. If this triggers a disproportionate reaction, this is a good warning. And if you're sleeping less or more than you used to, this is a good red flag to look at. If you're noticing changes in appetite, eating more, eating less, these are good things to notice. If you're noticing yourself becoming cognitively, noticing some cognitive changes, so you're focusing less, you're remembering less, you're not able to pay attention as you used to, all of these things are good things to look out for. Another thing that go are the physical changes, right? Sometimes we notice some physical exhaustion. There's pain right here. There's tension in the shoulders. There's a constant headache that shows up right here, right? Heaviness, pain. A lot of the time people dismiss these. Oh, it's fine. Later, later, right? And here's, again, if you're feeling more irritable, if you're feeling more agitated, any changes from your baseline, these are good things for you to look at. So, and these things, these moments, that disproportionate reaction, it's rarely about the small things. It's basically your nervous system finally signaling that, you know what, I'm running on empty. Someone needs to get involved here. Someone needs to interfere. Something needs to change. I'm running on fumes. So basically, what we want to try to do is we want to jump in before that nervous system signals the alarm bells.
Yeah, that makes sense. And do a lot of times people not even recognize that they are suddenly in this role of being a caregiver?
This definitely does happen where people do not notice that they are in the role of caregiver, because again, as we said at the beginning, it comes with a lot of purpose, it comes with a lot of drive. Really, the person you're taking care of is someone you care about very dearly most of the time. So you're like, it's okay. Yeah, I love this person. I'm paying it forward. I feel good about it. It's allowing you to honor this relationship. It's allowing you to honor the person, etc., etc. But then, you don't notice how this role starts to creep into your daily life, how it starts creeping your decision-making process, your choices, your scope of control. And then again, as we start losing that identity of like, wait, what am I? Where into all of this? What am I doing here?
Caregivers can feel guilty a lot of times as well, and they tend to maybe not want to enjoy themselves or go out and really live their life. At what point do they start beginning to release that and realize where that guilt actually comes from?
So where the guilt comes from is basically it starts from this internalized belief that the caregiver's worth is tied to self-sacrifice. That basically the notion of resting, that enjoying yourself, finding happiness in day-to-day things means abandoning the person they love, or that their own needs are a betrayal of the seriousness that the other person's suffering or of their role, of their responsibility, etc., etc. They feel that taking care of themselves goes against the role that they're supposed to be playing, right? Realizing this starts with reframing this whole caregiving notion. It's important to understand that sustainable care requires a rested caregiver, right? And I always practice what we are told in the safety video on the plane, where part of the safety video is you need to put your own, if cabin pressure decreases, you have to put your own mask on before you can put other people's mask on. So whether it's your kids, your husband, whoever it is, even if it's the most precious person in your life, you got to start with yourself first, right? Because sustained care requires a rested caregiver. And it's the same thing, right? If you're going to put someone else's oxygen mask on first, you're not going to be able to give that sustained care because the cabin pressure is going to drop, your oxygen supply is going to drop, you're going to pass out before you're going to be able to do what you need to do. So it's very important for us not to think of this as a sprint. This is a marathon, as you mentioned, whether it's something that's a couple of months, still a marathon, or it's a couple of years, still a marathon, right? So that isn't a withdrawal from caregiving. It's what makes continued caregiving possible. And that's what we have to keep in mind, right? It's also about giving our self-worth, giving ourselves value, right? Taking on this role is very important, but we have to remind ourselves that this is still a role that we're taking on. This is us. This is not our existence. This is not, our worth. So it's very important for us to also think, where do I fit into this, right? Why am I okay sacrificing myself for anyone else?
Yeah, it's true. Are there any other signs that a caregiver should invest in themselves, something we haven't covered yet?
As we said, so increasing irritability or a short over minor things, losing in the things that you used to enjoy or used to bring you joy, any changes in sleeping, especially a difficulty in sleeping, even if you're exhausted and tired, getting sick more often, right? Our immune system tends to also respond to burnout, getting weaker. And this is a good thing for us to notice if we're getting sick more often, feeling numb rather than sad, feeling like we're not fit, like it's a flattening of affect, not just fatigue, but we're just numb. We're not feeling anything. No joy, no sadness, no anger, no nothing, just status quo. So these are a few occur for us to look out for. Yeah.
Caring for someone with a mental health condition often carries a specific weight as well, whether it's stigma, isolation that we just touched upon, also the sense that other people don't really understand where they're coming from. So, what do those caregivers need that they rarely get?
First of all, we need to validate that this is genuinely really hard, primarily because with the lack of visible markers, basically, as you mentioned, like there's no cast, there's no hair loss, there's no significant physical visible markers. The lack of visible markers, this is what prompts others to bring in a casserole, to bring in some food, to ask how you're doing, to offer help. In the absence of this, there's less of a social script for this kind of caregiving, right? There's more isolation. There's often confusion about where, others' responsibilities ends, the other person's autonomy begins. It's a bit of it's an uncharted territory more than with physical illness. With physical illness, it's more manageable. There's a clearer script. With mental illness, the script tends to be confusing.
Yeah.
And part of it is also there remains a lot of shame around mental illness, right? It's easy for someone to say, I have a headache, I need some painkillers versus I'm feeling really depressed or I'm feeling really anxious about this, or I'm struggling with this, or I'm struggling with that. Generally saying I'm struggling is a very hard thing for us to do, let alone mental illness. So in a lot of situations as well, the shame, the stigma that still aligns with mental illness is a bit confusing as well, and doesn't allow people to get their needs met, whether the care receiver or the caregiver, as properly as they both need.
Yeah. I guess sometimes in terms of support, if friends and family or just anyone in general that they speak to is not well versed with a mental health condition, how would they even know how to support someone?
Exactly. Exactly. But it's
Yeah.
important to remember that whoever it is, whether it's the caregiver or the care receiver, it always starts with the most important things, being asked directly and being believed when you answer, right? So
Yeah.
first and foremost, even with physical illness or with mental health, we're sometimes unsure of what the other person needs. And so we may hesitate to offer help, we may hesitate to reach out because we don't know what the other person needs. So a good way to go about it is just be direct about it. Ask directly, but remember to believe what's if someone says, I'm so tired, I can't do this anymore, coming back with, no, you can, you got this, is not very helpful. Right? So directly and believe the answer. Right?
Sometimes caregivers don't always have the patience because one, you're dealing with something new that you've never dealt with. You don't know anyone else with a mental health condition, for instance.
Yeah.
It could be that you've never heard of it, or you don't know anyone else who's lived with it or been living with it. And so you don't really know how to respond as well. So in those cases, for people who may already be stressed and tend to sort of lose their cool a bit,
Yeah.
what would you recommend?
A good part of all of it is seeking support and self-care, right? As you mentioned,
Okay.
because a lot of these things are new, whether physical or mental, being a caregiver is not something that we all necessarily know how to do to a very deep extent. We might know how to do it on a surface level, but to do it for a long period of time on a deeper level is not something that we're all versed on how we do it, right? So it's good to seek out support. It's good to find support groups. It's good to talk to people who have already been through this, whether people you know or people you don't know. So seeking out support groups, seeking out resources, talking to the experts is good, right? Talking to the mental health experts, community experts, professional caregivers, healthcare providers is valuable. Talking to, again, finding support groups, talking to family members, talking to your group of people, trying to connect with your support system, whether it's a professional one or a personal one, is very important and very valuable. But also allowing them time, because as you mentioned, it is hard, especially for someone who hasn't experienced it, right? I always liken it to explaining childbirth to someone who's never had a baby, right? You can describe it, they can try to bring it as close to a reality that they know as possible, but there will always be some kind of disconnect. You will not be able to actually understand it unless you've been through it. And even then, it may not be a complete understanding, but it's important for us to remember, so in situations where it's so hard for you to understand what it means, right? It feels like very frustrating because you feel like you got this, you can do this, you can work through this. Like, why aren't you taking control? Why aren't you doing what needs to be done? Why aren't you,
Yeah.
right? So sometimes, for example, with people who might have a diagnosis of anxiety, a lot of people may say, oh, stop worrying. It's not as simple as that, right? So a lot of times it's also about trying to educate ourselves a bit more about how hard it is, what it actually means, what anxiety feels like, what depression feels like, what OCD feels like, what all of these diagnoses or the symptoms of these diagnoses, what they feel like to the person, so that we can try to understand it a bit better, right? Because anxiety isn't just worry, right? Depression isn't just feel bad. So sometimes if we don't have enough of that knowledge, sometimes it might feel like just pull yourself through it, but it's not
Yeah.
is that. So this is also part of where that frustration for the caregiver comes from, where for them it seems like such an easy answer, but for the other person, it's a really, really hard thing. So patient is
And what does realistic self-care actually look like for a caregiver?
so in a lot of situations when I talk self-care, A lot of people think, oh, it means booking a 2-week vacation and going away. But realistic self-care is about small, protected, and I highlight the protected, intentional and protected pockets of time doing something that has nothing to do with caregiving, right? And so say this, it could be 5 minutes, right? 5 minutes of a hobby you like, a text to a friend, music in the car, going to get a coffee rather than, if there's a coffee shop that you really love, rather than making your coffee at home, drive the extra 5 minutes, go to your favorite coffee shop, grab your coffee, have it at the coffee shop. Don't rush through it, right? But it's about creating those intentional, small, protected pockets of time, doing things that are just yours. And again, they could be anything. Sometimes I say to mothers who are so tired, I say it could be a bath instead of a shower. It's as simple as saying, I need 5 minutes or 15 minutes of me time, even if it means allowing on their devices, even if it means, locking yourself in a room for 5 minutes, knowing that everyone is safe and well, but just saying, I need 5 minutes just to lay on the bed, listening to music, isolating, being in my space for 5 minutes. That's amazing. So it isn't necessarily spa days. It's basic maintenance done consistently, right? Eating something real, a short walk, an honest conversation a week. The goal is not indulgence. The goal is regulation. So when we're talking about this isn't about luxury. This is necessity. And so when we're talking necessity, come back to the things that actually matter for you and help you regulate your system and do them, even if they're small pockets divided throughout the day. Just do them.
That's such great advice because, yeah, little pockets of me time in a day or just pouring into your own cup is so important. And you don't realize how doing that little bit for yourself actually does so much for you in the long run. Or even just hours later, you may feel the difference and realize, like, oh, yeah, I'm glad I took that time out for myself. But even if it was 5 or 10 minutes, because it gives you a sort of energy boost or it just, yeah, makes you feel much better.
An important part of it is, as we said, intentional and mindful, intentional and also mindful, right? So if you're eating on the go, even if it's your favorite meal, that doesn't count. Okay. So it is about, even if you're sitting in your car, sit in your car and enjoy that meal, savor your meal, right? We're not multitasking through these self-care things. Because if we're multitasking, then we're not being mindful and then we're not getting the benefit, right? So even if I can't sit and indulge in that meal at a table, right? Do it but don't do it while driving. Don't eat while you're on a work call. Don't eat when you're running from point A to point B. Allow yourself 5 minutes to just enjoy that coffee in peace or that meal. Because again, even if it's your favorite meal, it's not going to count towards that self-care because you're not actually present with it.
Yeah. And for people who may sort of be afraid to sit with their thoughts in that mindful, focused practice, sometimes people don't want to be just sitting and having their coffee because they're afraid their mind will go all over the place and then they're again stuck in that loop in their head.
Yeah.
What would you suggest for them?
Part of it is these thoughts that we're trying to avoid, they don't disappear just because we're avoiding them, right? That's your elephant room. Just because we're choosing not to look in that direction doesn't mean that that thought has actually gone away. So even if we put it down, even if we've ignored it, even if we've done everything we can to distract ourselves from it, it's still there. And the impact of that thought, that impact of that emotion is still taking a toll on us one way or the other. So part of it is, instead of ignoring the emotions we don't want to face, instead of avoiding the thoughts we were trying to avoid, it's about actually learning to sit with these thoughts. And part of it is indulging in some of these self-care strategies. Some of it is take time for these self-care strategies, because this is what's going to help us regulate when we are faced with these difficult moments, with these difficult thoughts, with the discomfort. Because if I'm running on empty, I can't sit with discomfort, right? But if I've taken care of, I can sit with discomfort significantly better. Discomfort cannot be avoided. Discomfort cannot be shut out. It's there. Whether we choose to see it, it's there. So part of it is, how do we learn to sit with it? How do we understand what's causing it better? because that's when we can also address the sources of the discomfort. When we're pushing down the discomfort, it's not going away, right? But when we're able to understand it better, when we're able to notice it, then we're able to take the right action.
Yeah, the point that you made about sitting with your emotions, that's quite an important one as well, which again, people don't often do.
Yeah.
I think people are just not taught how to sit with their emotions, or that every emotion is an emotion that needs to be validated. You know, it's okay to be happy, it's okay to be sad, it's okay to be angry, but sit with it and go through it.
100%.
Go through that discomfort, I guess. Yeah.
And what we typically tend to forget is we tend to think that our emotions are caused by events. I'm upset. 1, 2, 3 happen. That's not what it is. Events trigger thoughts, and thoughts trigger our emotions. So if I want to try to change that emotion, it's not by ignoring it. It's not by pushing it away. It's not by denying its existence. It's about learning how to sit with that discomfort of it and trying to understand, why did I feel this way in this moment? What thoughts came to mind about this event that made me feel this way, right? So if I'm feeling frustrated, there must have been something that happened. Why am I feeling frustrated? What caused me to feel that frustration? What thought came to mind that led to this? So we are actually giving the meaning to the event, and the meaning we've given, the assumption we've made about the event, is what leads to the emotion. Learning to sit with that and understand it better helps us to also navigate it in a healthier way, and helps us to navigate it in the longer term as well. Because again, the point of all of this is sustained self-care, not just avoiding. Because if I'm avoiding, it's in the moment, but then you're going to bed and you can't avoid anymore. And your mind goes through every single emotion you've avoided throughout the day, every single thought you've not dealt with throughout the day. So we're not trying to endear, we're trying to learn how to sit with these emotions, understand where they're coming from, what are they trying to tell us about ourselves, about the situation, about this reality. And then accordingly, we want to work through them and learn how to sit with them.
So true. Yeah. I also feel like a lot of times when you suppress an emotion or suppress feelings about something, when you finally do sit with it and sort of release
Yeah.
it, you feel much lighter. I think because you go through that process.
Exactly.
How can a caregiver build a support system? And you said one of the main ways is through family and friends, but also support groups. Are there quite a few support groups in Dubai for caregivers or in the UAE?
So I'm not very sure about what support groups exist in the UAE, but there must be. But also a lot of the time you'll find like spontaneous support groups that come up. They may not be like actual like structured support groups. There are a few support groups for patients who are going through different illnesses, such as cancer support groups for patients themselves. So sometimes on the support groups, people will say, listen, my husband's going through a bit of a difficult time coping with this. Does anyone, know someone they can connect with, or another husband do this, or who's gone through this? And I know that some NGOs and organizations here are trying to work towards creating support groups for family members and loved ones and caregivers of patients.
Lovely. That's, yeah, such a lovely initiative. When should caregivers seek professional support?
Essentially, if, as we mentioned, like some of those red flags that we spoke about, if we feel like they are consistently disrupted, so for example, sleep, appetite, mood, if these, even cognitive ability, if you feel like it's consistently disrupted for more than 2 weeks, if there is a persistent feeling of hopelessness, or if the caregiver notices that they've stopped caring about their own health, or if we've noticed basically a lot of apathy, loss of interest in general, if they notice that it's starting to impact their own functionality or their functional abilities to cope with daily life, this is the line where we feel like we need to bring in a therapist, a doctor, a caregiver support groups, etc., etc. So at that point, that would be a very good time to do it. Yeah.
Could you tell us of ways that we can help caregivers that we know?
Sure. One thing we could do is to be very open and ask, what do you need? But also beyond that, it's about offering a specific task, not an open-ended offer. So not saying, so it's about either saying, what do you need? Or, but not saying, let me know if you need me, right? Let me know if you need me is an open-ended offer, right? So what do you need is a question to ask, or I'm gonna pick you up tomorrow and we're going to go for coffee, or I'm going to send you food, or I'm going to pick up your son, or so I'm going to offer a very specific task, or I'm going to ask what they need. But an open-ended offer, like let me know what you need, remains an open-ended offer forever. Nobody lets you know at the specific time. Asking it as a question, like, what can I help you with today? The more we're able to narrow it down, the more we're able to make it specific, the better. Check in on them, not just the patient. So a lot of the times people are calling, how's X, Y, and Z doing? Great. How are you doing? And a good thing is, is a good thing to do in this moment is to ask more specific questions. So start with how are you doing? But most of the time you're going to get, oh, I'm fine, I'm okay. Right? How did you sleep? Have you eaten? Is there something that's feeling particularly difficult today? Did something happen today that felt particularly difficult, etc.? So asking specific questions, because again, if we're asking how are you doing, we're going to get the fine, I'm okay. Normalize their exhaustion instead of praising their. So I can imagine you must be very tired. I can imagine it must be really difficult, rather than you're so strong for doing this, right? We don't want to just praise the strength, because then that also sets an idea that this is the expectation you have. They have to be strong all the time. Versus when we normalize the exhaustion, we're allowing them more space to actually talk about it, to feel vulnerable, to feel human, to feel weak. Because if we're only praising this, it could feel isolating, and people will not show up with their different them with their pain. They'll just show up when they're feeling good, which is not what we want, right? And it's about consistency. So showing up consistently, even briefly, over the long haul. Because typically, and this happens even in death, first few days, everybody's there. Everybody's checking in, everybody's calling, then the numbers start to drop. So typically we see a lot of influx of support in the first crisis week, in the first few days, in the first month, and it tapers off. Checking consistent, right? Over the long haul. Even if it's like saying, I'm going to check in once a week or twice a week, but it's about being very consistent about those check-ins, right? Just a good reminder that I'm here. That consistent is very valuable, right? Volumes when someone is very consistent with their presence.
Yeah. And I also think asking people open-ended questions, sometimes they're just so exhausted, they don't even know. They don't even have the answers. And so they're just like, yeah, I'm okay, I'm fine. Do you have any small rituals or daily habits, even if it's like something that would take 5 or 10 minutes, that a caregiver could use to regulate their nervous system?
So a few minutes of slow breathing is always a good go-to, is always very effective as start. And I always recommend doing this as part of a habit, as part of a routine, because sometimes people start to do this when they need it. And essentially, the more you practice it when you don't need it, the more effective that tool becomes. So I like to encourage people to do it as a ritual in the morning, as a way to get the day started, slowing down, taking a few slow breaths, placing an intention for the day, a plan, a direction for yourself, not just for your caregiving. It's going to take its own direction, but setting an intention for yourself. But also, how do we close the day, right? It's about taking a few deep breaths, slowing down the body, regulating the body, preparing the body for sleep. Because a lot of the time, we're so tired, we just plop into bed. So it is about creating like a good bedtime and nighttime ritual that incorporates slow breathing, sitting in silence just before the day starts or as the day ends, reflecting on the day. Just a moment for yourself before the demands start, before you pick up the phone, before the day begins. It's just about regulating the nervous system, creating one small window that's just purely yours, is untouched by others' needs, demands, expectations, etc. It's just about reflecting, pausing. But it is also that like trying to incorporate something to like a similar ritual to close the day as well. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Lovely. And that leads us to our last question that we always ask every guest on the Wellness Butter Show. Dr. Hiba, what is your wellness butter?
My wellness butter. I like to start my mornings ahead of everyone else because, again, I like to make space for me at the beginning of the day. I have 3 kids, so the chaos tends to happen very quickly. So I do like to wake up a bit early, just to have a bit of quiet time, even if it's just about sitting on the couch, listening to music, reading a book. Doesn't have to be massive accomplishment. It's just about some quiet time before checking screens, before everyone wakes up. Midday, trying to take a short walk outside, even if it's just for 5 minutes, just to reset. And in the evening, just writing down a few things that went well throughout the day, and then closing out the day with a nightly ritual that I do with my kids, where we reflect on something good that happened during the day, something we wish that could have happened better, and something we're looking forward to. And that just like helps us notice more of the gratitude and more of the opportunities throughout our day.
Hey, that's a beautiful way to end the day. Thank you so much, Dr. Hiba. That was such a lovely chat.